In the endless dark beyond charted space, something ancient stirred. It moved without propulsion, spoke without sound, and judged without mercy. They called it a myth. But today the myth looks back. The black was never truly silent. Even in the void of space where no air carried sound, the hum of sensors, the nervous breaths of crewmen, and the soft crackle of comlinks filled the sovereign warship Oblivion Crest. Positioned at the edge of Exoquadrant 91C, the fleet was meant to be a show of strength. 5 destroyers, 2 dreadnoughts, and the carrier Honor Flame. The human expansion tiers had expanded too far too fast, and now they were being reminded of their place. But something was off. Sir Lieutenant Vey called her voice tight and uncertain. "We've got movement deep space, no drive signature." High Commander High Marshal Kaylin Dray leaned forward. "What kind of movement?" She hesitated. I don't know. It's gliding fast. No propulsion detected, but it's covering distance. Like it's drifting on purpose." A murmur passed through the bridge crew. Ships didn't just drift with intention. Not in a straight line, not toward a sovereign fleet. High Marshal Kaylin Dray turned to the hollow display. A small dark blip moved across the star map. Untagged, unclassified, no identifiers, no heat signature, no ID beacon. It was almost invisible if not for the light it occasionally blocked out. "Put it on visuals," he said. A few clicks later, the central screen lit up, and a cold hush settled over the room. It wasn't a ship. Not by any design they recognized. It didn't gleam with hull plating or bristle with weapon ports. It looked more like a shadow or the memory of a ship, like something that should have rotted away eons ago. Its surface pulsed faintly like skin over metal. No lights, no markings, just motion. Steady, silent, wrong. "Bring the Honor Flame's cannons online," High Marshal Kaylin Dray ordered. Sir Lieutenant Sarah Len said again, her voice now quieter. "The Sentinel Reach and Dirgeborn have gone dark." He snapped his head toward her. "What? No communications, no energy signatures. They're just off the grid, same time that thing passed near them." The blip on the screen edged closer, still drifting, still quiet. But behind it, 2 ships, each capable of vaporizing a moon, were dead. High Marshal Kaylin Dray didn't waste time. "Sound a full alert. All hands ready. Weapons hot. Defensive grid is active. I want that thing marked now." No. But they couldn't mark it. Their systems wouldn't lock on. It was as if the ship was made of something outside sensor comprehension. Even their tracking drones spun wildly the closer they got their feeds full of static. And then it stopped. The ghost ship, or whatever it was, halted mid-space. No inertia, just stillness, directly between the fleet and the human-settled planet of Veltraxis below. Every commander on the bridge stared. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. The ship's systems stuttered. Gravity shifted for a breath. Something passed through them. An energy. A frequency, something that didn't belong in this reality. And then came the whisper. Not through comms, not through speakers, through their minds. "Leave." High Marshal Kaylin Dray's mouth opened, but no words came. "Sir." Sarah Len's face was pale. "Orders." He stared at the ship. The thing didn't fire, didn't threaten. It just was. And yet every instinct High Marshal Kaylin Dray had, every bone forged by years of military rule, every scar, every victory told him the same thing. This was not something to fight. He'd seen worlds burn, led sieges that cracked continents. But never, never had an entire dreadnought died silently. He pressed the fleet-wide communication. "All units, fall back. Immediate retreat. Do not engage. Murmurs of disbelief crackled through the command channels, but no one disobeyed. One by one, the mighty Meridian Sovereignty ships turned, leaving the shadow behind them. The vigilant pyre hesitated. Its captain, a bold woman named Cyril, refused to abandon her position. High Marshal Kaylin Dray could only watch from the rear visuals as the ghostly shape began to drift again straight toward her. He sent one last message. "Cyril, for the love of the gods, run." There was no reply, only static. Then silence. And just like that, the vigilant pyre vanished from all sensors. The retreat was chaotic. Not because the sovereign ships lacked discipline, but because they had no protocol for this. There were no entries in the archives about ghost ships that unmade capital-class vessels without firing a shot. No war manuals could explain what just happened to the vigilant pyre. The fleet's silent formation shattered into disarray. Dreadnoughts flanked the edges to shield the retreat, even though no one dared engage the entity. As they pulled out of Exo-Quadrant 91C, Thalor sat in his command chair, fists clenched around the armrests, eyes fixed on the holoscreen, showing Artaxis shrinking in the distance. He had never lost a ship under his command. Not like this. Lieutenant Sierra Len broke the silence. "It's not pursuing," he didn't answer. "It's just hovering where the vigilant pyre vanished." Still nothing from High Marshal Kaylin Dray. Then came the call. Encrypted local frequency from the planet below. "Unidentified sovereign vessel. This is Captain Idran Voss, Aiden Human Colonial Defense Artaxis Outpost 4. You left something behind." The crew flinched. A human calling a Meridian Sovereignty flagship unidentified wasn't just bold, it was suicidal. Thalor keyed the comm. "This is High Commander Thalor of the Meridian Sovereignty's 12th Fleet. Your outpost is under the protection of the Sovereign Banner. Stand down and explain your signal." The reply was dry, almost amused. "You mean you were under your protection? Seems like your fleet ran the moment our little friend arrived." Thalor gritted his teeth. "You're sitting on a Class F settlement. I suggest you remember who governs this system." But Captain Idran Voss didn't back down. Right. The same Meridian Sovereignty that got their flagship eaten by a ghost. "Tell me, Commander, did you even try to communicate with it?" A silence followed. They turned toward Thalor slowly. It hadn't even occurred to them. "No," Thalor finally admitted. "We don't negotiate with anomalies." Captain Idran Voss laughed bitter and short. "And you wonder why your Meridian Sovereignty keeps losing ground. That's not an anomaly. That's her." They leaned closer, whispering. "Sir, did he say her? I heard it." High Marshal Kaylin Dray replied. He tapped the comm again. "Who is she?" "Captain." Captain Idran Voss's voice dropped low. "We don't know what she is. We just call her the Veilborn. She appeared 6 months ago. First at the edge of Ethereum's dust line. Took out a mining fleet. Then she was spotted over Drexen 5 hovering over a rebel outpost. Everyone went silent. Not dead. Not destroyed. Just gone. No wreckage. No screams. No communications. Just absence." Vey's face paled. "Sir, this lines up. We had similar disappearances reported in sovereign sectors. We dismissed them as pirate attacks or freak malfunctions." "They weren't," High Marshal Kaylin Dray said grimly. Captain Idran Voss continued. "Every time she shows up, it's the same. Silent patient. Almost like she's watching, waiting. But there's a pattern." Thalor narrowed his eyes. "What kind of pattern? Colonial systems?" Human expansion tiers specifically. She only appears when sovereign ships arrive near them. Then she's a weapon, some secret tech your people are hiding. No commander. She's not ours. She doesn't protect us either. But if I had to guess, a pause. She hates Meridian sovereignty. Thalor turned away from the screen, staring at the dark sector now void of the honor flame. The entire time they'd assumed superiority, believed technology and order gave them dominance. But the Veilborn didn't care about dominance. She didn't want to fight. She wanted them to leave. Survey said, looking down at her console. She's moving again. Toward us. Number toward the surface. High Marshal Kalen Dre froze. Toward Veltraxis. Yes. Yes. Direct descent. The holoscreen lit up with flashing alarms. The dark silhouette moved like a smear across the stars, slow and steady, heading toward the largest human city on the planet. Solmir Spire. Commander Idran Voss's voice came through again, this time quieter. She's not here to attack. She's here to judge. High Marshal Kalen Dre frowned. Judge what? The same thing you're afraid of. Us. The Veilborn descended like a whisper of doom. From the skies above Solmir Spire it came, not with the roar of engines or the blare of landing sirens, but with silence so deep it seemed to pull sound from the air itself. People emerged from shelters, balconies, and rooftops, their eyes drawn to the sky. Children clutched their parents. Soldiers on the ground stood frozen fingers on triggers, hearts pounding. Captain Commander Idran Voss Aden stood at the outpost's edge, high on the western bluff overlooking the city. He had his sidearm holstered. Not that it would make any difference. He'd seen footage of what happened to the Drexun 5 garrison. A full rebel defense grid was swallowed in the lightless void within seconds. But this wasn't the same. This wasn't destruction. This was present. A terrible watching presence. She's not hostile, his adjutant whispered beside him. Not yet. Yeah? Commander Idran Voss muttered. You want to go down there and shake her hand? The wraith hovered 200 meters above the city. A great dark mass with no clear beginning or end. From this distance, it resembled a ship, but also something more organic. It pulsed. It breathed, like a massive heart forged from alien alloys and gravity wells. And then it changed. Before their eyes, its skin shimmered. Not lights, not energy, but images. Projections. Holograms, maybe, if they were that crude. But these felt real. It was the city. Their city. Solmir Spire, but twisted. Buildings crumbled. Fires burned. People ran. Screams, though silent, rippled through the illusion. A war scene that hadn't happened. Yet. It was a warning. She's showing us what we become, said Commander Idran Voss quietly. Or what we cause. His adjutant swallowed hard. We haven't done any of that. Commander Idran Voss shook his head. We haven't. Yet. But the Meridian sovereignty is breathing down our necks. One more crackdown. One more rebel flare-up. One more shipment of resource slaves off-world. And this city falls apart. That was the truth. Commander Idran Voss had done his best to keep the colony stable. But tensions were rising. Sovereigns wanted full resource control. Locals wanted independence. The Meridian sovereignty offered protection, but it came with mining quotas, off-world conscription, and strict surveillance. The Veilborn knew. Somehow it knew. Meanwhile, in orbit, Thalor watched the same projection on his bridge screen. A live feed was still connected to Commander Idran Voss's uplink. and what they were seeing left his crew speechless. "She's showing them a future," Lieutenant Syra Len murmured. "No," Thaler said. "She's showing us what happens if we stay." He could feel it in his bones. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a test, and High Marshal Kalen Dre's instincts screamed the same thing they had back in Exoquadrant 91C. "Leave." "She doesn't hate humans," Lieutenant Syra Len said suddenly. "She hates what happens because of us." That struck him. Hard. For all their might, the Meridian sovereignty had spread itself thin, pressing down on fragile expansion tiers, rewriting local cultures, feeding the central core with labor and ore and obedience. They had justified it as bringing order. But maybe that order bred monsters. "Sir," a junior officer interrupted, voice shaking. "Command Central is asking for a full report. They want to know why we abandoned engagement." Thalor stared at the projection of Aloran Ridge burning. The people. The fear. The future they were being shown was if he made the wrong call. They can wait. Back on the surface, the Veilborn's shimmering illusions faded. And then something even stranger happened. The entire underside of the ship opened, not with mechanical hatches or hydraulic arms, but like a pupil dilating. A soft white light poured out, enveloping the center of the city. People panicked, screamed, but there was no heat, no pressure, only stillness. And then the voices came, not loud, not spoken, but felt. Not just to Race, not just to Thalor, to everyone. "What you build will decide what I destroy." It echoed through every mind on Veltraxis, through every fleet officer, through every child. Then the light collapsed inward, and the Veilborn began to ascend. Captain Idran Voss stood in awe. "She's not just watching," he whispered. "She's weighing." The Veilborn stopped just above the atmosphere, hanging like a judgmental god. Waiting. High Marshal Kalen Dre turned to Lieutenant Syra Len. "We're not just at war with rebels anymore." She looked back at him, her voice barely a breath. "We're at war with our consequences." For hours she hovered just above the clouds, just below the stars. The Veilborn neither moved nor spoke again, yet her presence wrapped around the planet like invisible chains. It wasn't fear that held the people in place now. It was uncertainty. That same deep, gut-sick feeling you get when you realize something ancient, something beyond your species' comprehension has noticed you and is waiting to see what you'll do. In Aloran Ridge, the streets were quiet. People didn't go to work. Markets stayed closed. Children whispered instead of laughing. Everyone was watching the sky. The massive silhouette of the Veilborn hung over them like a question mark written in shadow. And somewhere in that stillness, in the poorer edge of the city, a young girl named Neera Solan stared up from the rooftop of her family's crumbling apartment block. She was 13, sharp-eyed, too clever for her age, and angry in the way only a child raised on broken promises could be. Her father had been conscripted by the Meridian sovereignty 3 years ago, shipped off to some mining belt beyond Etherian, never returned. Her mother worked double shifts to make up for the ration cut they'd faced afterward. Neera Solan understood more about politics and power than most adults. She also understood this. The Veilborn didn't come for nothing. She came for them. "Do you think it's going to kill us?" her little brother, Rian, asked. He stood beside her, gripping her sleeve. Neera Solan didn't answer right away. She just stared. "No," she finally said. "I think she wants to see if we'll kill ourselves first." Rian didn't understand. Not really. But he nodded anyway. Back at Outpost 4, Commander Idrin Voss poured another shot of stale whiskey into a dented metal cup. He hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, and his uniform clung to him with the sour dampness of stress. He hadn't stopped replaying Veilborn's words since she said them. What you build will decide what I destroy. What did that even mean? Civilization, government alliances, or did it mean choices? He slammed the cup down and flicked on the transmitter. Hi, Commander, High Marshal Kalen Dre. Are you still in orbit? The channel crackled for a second. Then the voice came. I am. And I assume you have something more than another warning. Commander Idrin Voss hesitated. I have a question. Then ask it. Commander Idrin Voss took a breath. Why did you come here in the first place? A pause. To remind you of your place. Commander Idrin Voss nodded bitterly. And do you know it now? High Marshal Kalen Dre didn't reply immediately. He stared out his viewport where the Veilborn still lingered. I don't know what she is, but I know this. If we don't pull out of this colony, she'll make sure we leave in pieces. She already made you leave, Commander Idrin Voss said. We're just waiting to see if you come back. Another long silence. Then you've made your point, Captain. He cut the channel. Moments later, the Sovereign fleet began to shift. First in subtle adjustments, then full withdrawal patterns. Not a retreat this time. A relocation, leaving orbit, returning to the jump lanes. Commander Idrin Voss watched it all from his office. She did it, his adjutant said, almost smiling. She scared them off. Commander Idrin Voss didn't smile. No, he said. She gave them a choice. They're just smart enough to take it. Back on the rooftop, Naira Solon watched the ships fade into the clouds. Where are they going? Ryan asked. Naira Solon squinted. Away. For now. She looked back up at the Veilborn, but not because they care, because something bigger told them to. And then, just as silently as she arrived, the Veilborn began to rise. Not fast, not fleeing, but slow, like a judge leaving the courtroom without delivering a verdict. She disappeared past the clouds, vanishing from view, but never truly gone, because everyone knew she was still out there, watching, waiting. 5 years later, her name was spoken like a myth. The Veilborn. Not everyone believed she was real anymore. Some claimed she was a rebel hologram tactic. Others said it was imperial propaganda spun out of control to mask a defeat. But in the outer expansion tiers and the places where the Meridian Sovereignty's grip had once been steel-tight and unshakable, her shadow still lingered. On Veltraxis, life had changed. The Meridian Sovereignty never returned. Not officially. They left under the guise of diplomatic reassessment. But the truth was carved into the memory of every soldier who saw the Vigilant Pyre disappear. They weren't in control anymore. Something had scared the rulers of half the galaxy into blinking first, and people remembered. But memory fades, especially when no more ships vanish, no more minds are touched, no more warnings are whispered across the stars. And so the tension crept back in. The old arguments resurfaced. This time, it came not from the Meridian Sovereignty, but from the humans themselves. Naira Solon was 18 now, no longer a curious child on rooftops. She'd grown up hard-shaped by years of watching her people teeter between freedom and chaos. She wore a leather jacket stitched with the white insignia of the Ridge Watch, a civilian patrol force meant to keep order without relying on either Meridian Sovereignty or rebel muscle. She had a scar across her cheek from a riot 2 years back, and her fists were calloused from more than just practice. But her eyes hadn't changed. Still sharp, still angry, still searching. That evening she stood at the base of the old city tower. A crowd gathered as shouting echoed from the square. Flags waved, red ones, black ones, fists painted on cloth. The Free Colonies movement had returned, and this time they weren't talking peace. "We don't need protection," one speaker yelled from the plinth. "Not from the Meridian sovereignty, not from any ghost. We're strong enough to stand on our own." Nyra Solin pushed through the crowd. She didn't like the way this was going. These protests were becoming more like rallies, and the lines between self-governance and militancy were blurring fast. She reached the front just as someone threw a bottle. It shattered against the plinth. Gas hissed. Screams followed. She didn't hesitate. Her hand shot to her earpiece. "Unit Delta. Dispersal protocol. Non-lethal. Get these people back." Gas-masked soldiers rushed in, pushing the crowd out with shields and voice amps. But it was already turning ugly. People weren't just angry. They were ready for a fight. The kind you don't start unless you've already convinced yourself the other side is worse. Later, after the streets had cleared and the wounded were patched up, Nyra Solin sat alone in the Ridgewatch command post, watching the night sky from the window. "Where are you?" she whispered. No answer, no flicker of shadow, no hum across the city, just stars, cold and distant. The door behind her creaked open. Commander Idran Voss walked in older beard grayer, his military coat now replaced by a civilian council sash. "You handled the riot well." She didn't look at him. "They'll be back tomorrow. Louder, angrier." "Probably," he said, sitting beside her. "They think freedom means chaos. Others think it means guns. No one agrees on anything except that they hate whoever's in charge." She looked at him finally. "And you? What do you think freedom is?" He smiled faintly. "Choice. That's all it ever was. The freedom to choose who we become." She stared out again. "And what if we choose wrong?" He hesitated. "Then she'll come back." They both fell silent at that. A moment later, her earpiece chirped. "Nyra Solin, you're gonna want to see this. We've got an inbound object, no drive signature, no transponder, heading straight for our taxes." Her blood turned to ice. Commander Idran Voss stood up fast. "No, it can't be." But she already knew. It was her. The Wraith was returning, and this time she wasn't silent. The alert spread through Solmir Spire like fire on dry grass. Inbound object. No drive trail, no heat, no propulsion. It's her. Nyra Solin didn't wait for backup. She was already sprinting down the watchtower's main stairwell 2 steps at a time, her boots thudding on metal grates. The air was heavy with something unspoken. Like the entire city had inhaled at once and was afraid to exhale. Every comms line buzzed with chatter, militia units requesting orders, old-timers whispering prayers, and civilians crying out for something, anything, to stop what they felt coming. At street level, people had gathered again. But it wasn't a riot this time. It was awe. Above them, blotting out part of the western sky, the Wraith was descending. No lights, no engines. Just motionless drift. That same eerie quiet, wrapping around it like a cloak. But this time, it didn't hover above the city. It was heading for Nyra Solin, not metaphorically, literally. The ship, if you could call it that, descended lower than ever before, down through the clouds, down past the atmospheric buffer zone, down until its massive form loomed directly over the watchtower plaza, casting a shadow that swallowed blocks of buildings in cold darkness. People screamed and ran. Others dropped to their knees. Children cried. Drones fell out of the sky. Even the automated turrets on the eastern wall powered down. The Wraith wasn't here to fight. She was here to see. Nyra Solin stood in the plaza, every instinct screaming at her to flee. But she couldn't move. She wasn't frozen by fear. It was something else. Something deeper, like a string buried inside her, was being pulled gently, firmly, guiding her towards the center. And then the beam came down. Not a weapon, not light. A corridor. A tunnel of translucent energy humming softly wrapped around her like a shimmering cage. Only her. No one else. When one of the watch soldiers tried to rush in, he hit the barrier and bounced off, dazed. She was being chosen. Commander Idrenvoss's voice cut through her earpiece, sharp and panicked. "Nyra Solin, do not go in. That's not an invitation. It's a trap." But she already knew that wasn't true. The Wraith didn't lure. She summoned. And Nyra Solin had been waiting her whole life. She stepped forward. The corridor lifted her off the ground, slow and steady. The people below looked up, shouting her name. Some begged her to come back. Others just watched, stunned. She didn't look back. The beam pulled her up and through the underbelly of the Wraith. The texture of the corridor shimmered around her, neither metal nor light, not glass, not a force field, just something new, something impossible, and then it opened. She floated into a massive chamber, round, endless. The walls pulsed with veins of soft golden white light. It felt like she was inside a brain or a heart, something alive. And she wasn't alone. A shape floated in the center, vaguely human, tall, draped in dark material that shimmered like starlight. No face, no visible features, just presence. She couldn't tell if it was real or a projection, but it turned to her all the same. Then, without moving, it spoke, directly into her. "You have changed." Nyra Solin couldn't speak, not out loud, but something inside her responded. "You were watching. I never stopped." She felt emotions that weren't hers. Anger, disappointment, and underneath it all, hope. "Your kind forgot the warning," the Wraith continued. "You began again. The choosing, the dividing, the hoarding." Nyra Solin took a breath. "Some of us tried to change. Some of us still are. That is why you were brought." The chamber dimmed slightly. A wall in front of her peeled away. Not physically, but like a memory unlocking. Images swirled inside. The riot from earlier. The militia is preparing weapons. The rebel cells are stockpiling explosives in the underground. And the Meridian sovereignty. Ships. So many ships. Heading back. They return. The Wraith whispered. Nyra Solin clenched her fists. "Then stop them." "No." A pause. "You will." She stared. "Me. What you build will decide what I destroy." And then the corridor opened again, brighter now, pulsing with something urgent. She had been marked. A representative. A voice. Or perhaps a test. Nyra Solin was lowered back to the ground. In front of the stunned crowd, her boots touched the stone, knees buckling. She looked up just as the Wraith began to rise again. Quiet, slow, ever watching. The people stared at her like she was something else now, because she was. The Wraith had chosen her, and war was coming. The world didn't go back to normal, not after what happened in the plaza. Not after the Wraith chose Nyra Solin. She tried to walk home that night, tried to slip through the alleyways, pull her hood over her face, blend into the city she'd known her whole life. But it was impossible. People stopped talking when she passed. They stared, whispered, pointed. Some bowed their heads. Others simply backed away, afraid. It wasn't fame. It was fear. By morning, her name was on every colony transmission. Nyra Solin Ven, touched by the Wraith. Some called her a prophet. Some called her a weapon. A few even called her a traitor, And none of them were entirely wrong. Commander Idran Voss called an emergency council meeting. She didn't get a choice this time. He had a patrol escort her straight to City Hall. He stood at the head of the long ironwood table. His jaw was tight, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. Around him the rest of the council, scientists, ex-military officers, local elders, even a few former rebels, sat in stiff silence. Every eye turned to Naira Solan as she entered. "You've been chosen," Commander Idran Voss said without ceremony. "So explain what that means." Naira Solan took her seat and spoke slowly, deliberately. "She showed me everything, not just what's happening here, but out there, across the other expansion tiers. The Wraith's been watching them all, tracking where war is likely, where hate is growing, where greed is spreading. She's waiting for a line to be crossed. And you, one councilwoman interrupted, are supposed to tell us what that line is?" "No," Naira Solan replied. "I'm supposed to prevent us from crossing it." Laughter broke out, sharp and bitter. "You're 18, barked one of the military reps. "We've got entire districts on the brink of civil war. Rebel splinters are arming themselves in the mountains. And now Intel says the Meridian Sovereignty's fleet is inbound again 6 days out. You think you can just hold all that back with words?" "No, Naira," Solan said flatly. "Not with words." She paused, "but maybe with truth." Commander Idran Voss raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "She didn't choose me because I'm special. She chose me because I'm angry, because I've seen this place rot from the inside. I felt how power is misused, how easy it is to turn on each other the moment we feel threatened. She knows we'll destroy ourselves before the Meridian Sovereignty even sets foot here." One of the rebels leaned forward. "So what? You're her mouthpiece now." "I'm a mirror," Naira Solan said. "She didn't come to punish us. She came to warn us." The room fell quiet again, and then Commander Idran Voss spoke calm but cold. "The Meridian Sovereignty will arrive in 6 days. They claim they're coming to re-establish order peacefully, but we know what that means. They'll put boots on the ground, then checkpoints, then curfews, then disappearances." Everyone nodded. No one disagreed. "She'll destroy them," someone muttered. Naira Solan shook her head. "Not right away. The Veilborn only intervenes after we fail, if we fight them without cause, if we spark war, shed blood, and escalate. She won't protect us. She'll wipe us all out." That was the message. Commander Idran Voss sighed. "Then we've got a choice." "Exactly," Naira Solan said. "We either prepare for war or prove we're worth saving. By doing what unifying, fast, open the rebel channels, reconnect the expansion tiers, get the militia leaders to the table, disarm the agitators on both sides, start broadcasting truth, not fear." And when the Meridian Sovereignty arrived, she looked around the room, letting her words land. "We show them we're not broken." Another silence. Then Commander Idran Voss nodded once. "You've got 6 days, Naira Solan." She stood. "Then let's not waste them." And across the stars in the deep black stretch of space, 6 sovereign ships entered pre-jump formation. In the lead vessel, High Commander High Marshal Kalen Dray stared at a recent scan of Artaxis. His face was stony, but his eyes were wary. "She's still there?" he asked. Lieutenant Syra Len looked up from her console. "No sightings since the last descent, but locals say she's watching." High Marshal Kalen Dray narrowed his eyes. "She always is." And with that, the fleet entered the void. They arrived at dawn, arrived at 6 sovereign warships broke through the upper atmosphere of Artaxis, their hulls gleaming like blades against the sun. Massive, methodical, unhurried. They didn't bring fire. Not yet. Their formation was tight, clean, deliberate, a show of force, not an act of war. Dropships detached one after another, descending toward the surface like silver raindrops. And the world held its breath. Nera Solon stood at the base of the old Unity Square where the city had once hosted parades back when the Meridian sovereignty was still worshipped like a god. The statue of the first governor had long since been torn down, replaced by a simple metal pole bearing a flag with no faction, just a single white circle over gray, the symbol of neutrality, of choice. She wore her Ridgewatch jacket, but beneath it armor plates borrowed from rebel stocks. She carried no weapon. Behind her stood a wall of voices. Council members, militia leaders, ex-rebels, medics, engineers, farmers. Not an army, a people. And above them the sky shimmered faintly. She was watching. The Veilborn, hovering just beyond the clouds, still silent, a god without a voice, until she needed one. The first sovereign dropship landed with a hiss of steam, its side hatch unfolding like a mouth. Soldiers filed out in rigid lines, visors down, rifles held across their chests, but not raised. Then he emerged. High Commander Thalor. Older, wearier, but no less dangerous. He stepped forward, hands behind his back, flanked by 2 armored lieutenants. His eyes locked on Nera Solon immediately. No hesitation. No confusion, you, he said. I remember you. Nera Solon didn't flinch. I remember you too. You ran. A flicker of something amusement crossed his face. I made a tactical retreat, he said coldly. No, Nera Solon said. You listened. That's why you're still alive. His mouth tightened, but he didn't argue. We're not here to fight, he said finally. Not unless we're forced. Then don't be, she replied. The wind shifted slightly. The faint shimmer in the sky darkened. People around her looked up uneasy. Thalor noticed too. He looked to the heavens, then back at her. You think she'll stop us again? Nera Solon shook her head. Number, she's not here to stop anyone. Not anymore. Thalor frowned. Explain. She's here to witness. That's it. She gave us the choice. This time it's up to us. We fire first. She ends us all. You oppress, enslave, or incite, and she burns your fleet down to atoms. You force her hand, and no one walks away. Thalor's lieutenants shifted uncomfortably, but he stayed still. You expect us to just leave. I expect you to see. Nera Solon said, We're not the same people you left behind. We're not Meridian sovereignty. We're not rebels. We're not trying to overthrow or serve. We're trying to live, and if you can't accept that... She looked up, eyes locking on that great ghost in the sky. Then she'll end the conversation for us. A silence fell so complete that even the breeze stopped. Then from above the clouds parted. A beam of light fell, not blinding, not loud, just final. It landed between them, neither warm nor cold, neither inviting nor hostile. It simply was. The crowd gasped. Thalor stared. Nera Solon didn't move. And then she heard it. Not in her ears, not in her mind, but in her bones. Judgment withheld, choice observed. Outcome pending. Thalor took a step back, pale. She spoke to me. So now you believe, Nera Solon said quietly. I always did, he admitted. I just hoped I wouldn't have to again. The light faded. The clouds closed. The wraith rose slowly, disappearing into the sky. She was leaving them to their decisions. And this time, There would be no third warning. Thalor turned to his officers. "Stand down. Full withdrawal. I won't be the one who triggers extinction." They nodded, and as the dropships retracted and the warships pulled away, Nira Solon finally allowed herself to breathe. They'd survived. Not through power, but through restraint, through change. She looked around at her people. No cheers, no applause, just quiet understanding. They hadn't won. They'd been spared, for now. But it was enough. Nira Solon turned toward the sky, whispering just loud enough for the wind to carry. "We heard you." And somewhere in the stars, the Wraith waited, watching, always watching. Above Veltraxis, the sky was quiet, but every eye turned upward knew what lingered just beyond sight. She hadn't vanished. She had only stepped back waiting, not as a savior, not as a conqueror, but as a consequence.